The alien academy was filled with silence as the students gathered in the bright white medical hall, their large dark eyes fixed on the subject standing in the center of the room. The subject was a human, tall and calm, with no trace of fear in his expression. The teacher, an older alien with long thin fingers, announced the lesson in a quiet but steady tone. Today they would study resilience. Every student leaned forward with excitement. They had studied healing, recovery, and medical treatments across many species, but this lesson promised something no one had seen before. The teacher prepared a vial, a liquid so black it looked alive inside the glass. Whispers spread through the students. They all knew what it was, a toxin harvested from the venom glands of the Virax serpent. Even a drop was enough to stop a strong alien heart within seconds. No one had ever survived it, yet here, in front of their eyes, the teacher was preparing to inject it into the human. The human rolled up his sleeve, his face showing neither fear nor worry. Some students shook their heads in disbelief, others leaned closer, their hearts pounding with curiosity. When the needle pierced his skin and the venom entered his bloodstream, a heavy silence fell over the room. The students waited for the human to collapse, waited for the screams, waited for his body to twist in pain as life left him, but none of it happened. Instead, the human coughed once, rubbed his chest, and then smiled. It was a calm smile, the kind that made the aliens shiver, because it was not the smile of someone unaware of danger. It was the smile of someone who already knew the outcome. Gasps echoed through the hall. One alien student covered her mouth with her hands, whispering, "He should be dead." Another student scribbled on his datapad with shaking fingers, documenting every second of what they were seeing. The teacher froze, his pale eyes wide. Even he had expected the demonstration to end differently. The poison was absolute. The death was supposed to be certain. Yet the human stood there, alive, breathing, his heart beating stronger than before. Whispers turned into arguments. Some students hissed that it was a trick. Others said it was impossible. One young alien leaned close to his friend and whispered with trembling words, "If they can survive this, what else can they survive?" The teacher raised his hand for silence, but his own voice trembled when he finally spoke. "You are witnessing something beyond your understanding. Humanity does not heal as we do. They endure, they fight. Their bodies are built not for comfort, but for survival." His words sent a chill across the room. Every student now looked at the human not as a classmate but as something far more dangerous. The human looked around at their frightened eyes and shrugged, as if nothing had happened, as if this entire lesson was routine. That small gesture carried more weight than any lecture. It told the aliens one undeniable truth. Death to a human was not the same as death to them. Minutes passed, but the tension only grew. The human flexed his arm where the venom had entered, the skin red but already calming. The aliens exchanged fearful looks, their minds racing with dark possibilities. If one human could survive this, what would an army of them endure? A student dared to ask in a shaky voice, "Does it hurt?" The human turned his eyes to the student, his gaze steady. "Yes, it hurts, but pain is not the same as death." His simple words sent another wave of unease through the hall. The students had grown up believing pain was a warning, a line that could not be crossed without risk of dying. But here was a species that treated pain as just another obstacle. The teacher finally dismissed the demonstration, but the students could not move, their minds trapped in the memory of that impossible survival. One alien muttered again, "He should be dead." Yet the human was still standing, stronger than before. The class ended, but the fear had only begun. For the first time the alien students understood why humans were called Deathwelders, creatures born in a place so hostile that even death itself seemed unable to claim them easily. The whispers followed. The human as he walked calmly out of the room, his footsteps echoing like a warning. Every eye followed him, every heart beat faster, and one thought repeated in their minds like a curse. If humanity could survive what kills others, then what power did they truly hold over the galaxy? The story of that day would spread far beyond the walls of the academy, but for the students who had witnessed it firsthand, the lesson would never fade. They had not only studied resilience, they had stared survival in the face, and it had smiled back at them. The next morning the lecture hall was filled long before the start of class. Alien students rushed in with their datapads, their eyes restless and full of questions. The air was heavy with whispers. The event of the previous day had spread like fire. Every corner of the academy knew about the human who had taken the serpent's venom and lived. Some did not believe the tale. Others swore they had seen it with their own eyes. Those who had been present at the demonstration now sat quietly, their faces pale, replaying every moment again and again in their minds. The human entered the room slowly, calm as ever, walking down the rows with the same steady stride. He carried no weapon, no shield, yet every student leaned back slightly as he passed, their instincts warning them to keep distance. It was not hatred in their eyes, it was fear. The teacher entered last, his long robe dragging against the polished floor, his expression unreadable. He called for silence, but the hall was already silent, all attention fixed on him. He cleared his throat and began. Yesterday you witnessed something none of you were prepared for. What you saw was no trick, no mistake. It was truth. Humanity is different. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some students tapped nervously at their desks. Others avoided looking at the human, who simply sat upright, his gaze steady and detached. The teacher continued. For centuries we believed resilience had a limit, that the body breaks and never rises once poison claims it. But now you have seen a body that refuses. You have seen a species that endures where all others fall. One student raised her trembling hand, her voice unsteady. How is it possible? How can something lethal to all of us be nothing to him? The teacher hesitated. As though he did not want to speak, finally he answered, it is not nothing, it is suffering. His body fights. His cells destroy the poison at great cost. But they rebuild. The human's head turned slightly toward the student. His lips curved in the smallest of smiles. That smile unsettled more than the teacher's words, because it confirmed the truth. He had suffered, but he had survived. The whispering grew louder. A group of alien students argued in hushed voices. One said, their bodies must be full of hidden technology. Maybe nanites. Maybe machines inside their blood. Another snapped, no, it's natural. That's why it's worse. They are born like this. A third leaned closer and muttered, if one can survive poison, what can an army survive? What could they endure in battle? The words spread like a storm, until the entire hall was buzzing with panic. Finally the teacher slammed his hand against the podium. The sharp sound silenced them. Enough, you must not think of war. This is a lesson in medicine. But even as he said it his eyes betrayed him. Because he too had thought of war the night before. He too had imagined fields of human soldiers rising again and again while others fell once and never stood. The tension refused to fade. Another student spoke out. His voice strong but his hands shaking. Professor, why did they create such medicine? Who would ever need to survive that poison? The human turned his gaze to the speaker. His voice calm. My people did not create it for this poison. We created it for worse. The room froze at those words. Silence heavier than stone. Every student stared at him, searching for meaning. Worse. The word echoed in their minds like thunder. Worse than the serpent's venom. Worse than certain death. What kind of world could force a species to prepare for worse? The teacher finally nodded slowly, as if agreeing with the human. Their world is a death world. Storms that peel flesh, beasts with claws that slice bone, diseases that burn through blood. They learned to survive or they perished. For them, survival is not victory. Survival is daily life. The students looked at one another, their scales, fur, or feathers bristling with unease. They had grown up in safe colonies, cared for by medicine that soothed pain quickly. Their greatest fear had always been minor wounds or fevers, but humans lived where nature itself was an enemy, and they had thrived. The panic only grew deeper. One young alien scribbled on his datapad with such force the stylus cracked. Another leaned back so far in his seat he nearly fell. The fear was not only of the human's resilience, it was of what it meant for the future. If one human could walk into their academy and overturn everything they thought they knew about biology, then what else was hidden in the shadow of that species? The humans sat in silence, letting their fear grow. Perhaps he knew that nothing he said could calm them. Perhaps he understood that fear was the natural reaction to truth. By the end of the lecture the students were no longer the same. Their whispers had turned into trembling. Their notes were filled with half-written words and frantic sketches. When the dismissal bell rang no one moved at first. Then slowly they rose, giving wide space to the human as he left, his footsteps echoing like yesterday, steady, unhurried, terrifying in their calm. As he disappeared into the corridor the whispers returned, louder now, more frantic. Some said he was unstoppable, others said he was cursed. A few muttered that such creatures should never be allowed near the galaxy's heart. But no one could forget the truth they had seen. No one could deny it. The human had survived the impossible. and that survival had planted a seed of fear that would grow inside them forever. The teacher stood alone in the empty hall after they had gone, his hands pressed against the desk, his voice low as he whispered to himself, "They are not like us, and they never will be." Outside, the sound of students' frightened whispers carried through the corridors, and in the center of it all, the human walked silently, every step reminding them of the one fact that none could erase: he should be dead, yet he lived. And that truth was more terrifying than death itself. The academy had not calmed. If anything, the storm inside its halls had grown worse with every passing hour. Rumors spread like a virus, traveling from one wing of the campus to another. Students spoke in whispers in the libraries, in the canteens, even in the dormitories late at night, all about the same thing: the human, the one who had taken death into his veins and laughed. No one could explain it, and when something could not be explained, it became fear. By the third day, the teacher decided the class could not move forward without addressing it directly. He announced another demonstration. This time not poison. This time something different. He promised clarity, though his own voice sounded uncertain as he said it. The lecture hall filled again, the seats overflowing as even students from other courses slipped in to watch. The human was already standing at the center when they arrived, calm, silent, waiting, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. The teacher spoke. "Today we will compare methods, alien medicine against human medicine, our ways against theirs." He motioned for one of the volunteers, a young alien with scaled skin, to step forward. The volunteer cut his arm carefully with a sterilized blade. Bright green blood flowed, and he winced slightly but did not cry out. The teacher applied a shimmering gel from a small container. Within seconds the blood slowed, and within minutes the cut began closing, smooth, clean, painless. The students nodded. This was what they knew. This was safety. Then all eyes turned to the human. He reached into a pouch and pulled out a small container of dull white powder and a roll of rough fabric. No shimmer, no glow, nothing that looked advanced. The human held up his arm. Then without hesitation drew the blade across his own skin. The cut was deeper, harsher, red blood gushed. Some students gasped in horror. A few looked away. The human did not flinch. He sprinkled the white powder directly into the wound. The blood hissed as if reacting to fire. His face tightened with pain, but he did not collapse. Then he wrapped the fabric tightly around his arm, pulling the cloth until his muscles strained. The sound of his teeth grinding was loud enough for those in the first rows to hear. But his eyes remained calm. When he finished, he looked up at the class, his arm still bleeding slightly beneath the rough bandage. The room was filled with whispers. "Why would anyone do that? It's barbaric. It will infect. It will kill him." One student almost shouted, "Professor, stop this before he dies." But the teacher raised his hand, his face pale. Let him continue. Time passed, long slow minutes that stretched like hours. The alien volunteer sat comfortably, his gel still glowing faintly, his wound almost invisible now. The human stood silently, his arm throbbing beneath the bandage, sweat on his brow. Yet he did not waver. Finally the teacher dismissed the class, but the human remained standing, as though challenging them all with his endurance. The next morning the lecture hall was even more crowded. Everyone wanted to see the result. The alien volunteer displayed his arm proudly. The cut had healed to a faint scar, perfect, painless. Then the human removed his bandage. His arm was raw, angry red, but the wound was closed, thick scar tissue already forming, no shimmer, no glow, only raw survival. He flexed his fingers, the scar stretching, but the hand worked. The students stared in disbelief. He should have been infected. He should have been weak. But he was not. He was functional, strong, unbroken. The teacher's voice was quiet but carried across the room. "You see the difference? Our medicine heals with comfort. Theirs heals with suffering. Our medicine soothes. There's scars. But both reach the same end, survival." He paused, then added in a voice even quieter, "And sometimes theirs works when ours does not." Those words spread fear like lightning, because in that moment the students realized human methods were not just primitive. They were terrifyingly effective, even when stripped of beauty and safety. They delivered one thing that mattered most: life. One student dared to ask, his voice shaking, "How many times have your people used this? How many scars do you carry?" The human looked at him for a long moment, then slowly rolled up his other sleeve. His skin was a map of scars, thin white lines crossing thick jagged ones. His arms told a story of pain endured again and again. Some students recoiled, others leaned closer, unable to look away. The human pulled his sleeve down without a word, but the image was already burned into their minds. Survival had a price, and humanity had paid it countless times. After the class dismissed, the panic only deepened. In the corridors, students argued furiously. Some said this was madness. No species should live like that. Others said it was strength. A strength none of them could match. One student whispered to her friend, "If they can endure wounds that would cripple us, if they can keep fighting when we would fall, then what will happen in war?" The friend shivered, unable to answer. But the question lingered in the air, haunting them all. That night, the alien volunteer lay in his dormitory, staring at the faint scar on his arm. His gel-made scar was neat, painless, almost invisible. But in his mind he saw the human's rough scar, thick, ugly, proof of suffering endured, and he realized something that made him tremble. If he had to face battle, if comfort was stripped away, his healing would mean nothing. He would break, he would fall, but the human would keep standing. No matter the pain, no matter the scars, and that truth was far more terrifying than any poison. The whispers had not ended since the last demonstration. The scars on the human's arms haunted every student who had seen them. Some could not sleep. Some dreamed of battlefields filled with humans who refused to fall. The academy cafeteria was full of hushed voices, questions no one wanted to answer. How much pain could a human take? How many times could they be cut, burned, poisoned before they finally broke? No one knew, and the not knowing was worse than any answer. By the next lecture the tension was so thick it clung to the air like smoke. The students filed in quietly, their eyes never straying far from the human. He sat calmly as always, his face unreadable. But they could not forget the scars he had revealed, the marks of endless suffering written into his very flesh. The teacher began the lesson, but his words barely reached the students. Their eyes flicked constantly to the human. Their hands shook as they wrote notes. One young alien with pale skin and trembling fingers finally raised his hand. His voice thin but loud enough to break the silence. "Professor, I have a question." The teacher nodded warily, and the student turned not to him but to the human. "How many of your people have died? How many had to suffer before you discovered these medicines?" The room froze, the question hung heavy in the air. No one dared breathe. The teacher looked as if he wanted to stop it. But the human's eyes lifted slowly, locking onto the student. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence was worse than any words. The alien students leaned forward, their hearts pounding, waiting. The human's gaze was steady, cold, unblinking. He finally spoke. "Thousands." His voice was calm. But the weight of the word crushed the room. The alien student swallowed hard. But before he could lower his eyes the human continued. "Tens of thousands. Maybe more. We learned through failure. We learned through loss. Every scar I carry is mine. But every medicine we carry is bought with lives." The students recoiled as if struck. One covered her face. Another muttered in disbelief. "That is madness. That is cruelty." But the human's face remained unchanged, his eyes like iron. "You call it cruelty, we call it survival." The teacher stepped in quickly, his voice uneasy. "Enough. The question is answered." But it was too late. The answer had already spread like fire. The alien students looked at each other in shock, horror mixing with awe. One whispered to another, "They sacrifice their own. They experiment on themselves." Another whispered back, "And they succeed. That is why they are still here." One student, shaking badly, whispered the forbidden thought aloud. "If they are willing to sacrifice so many of their own, what will they do to us if war ever comes?" The hall fell into silence again, because no one could answer. The human leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But the weight of his silence pressed down on every heart. The students realized then that humanity's power did not come from strength alone. It came from their willingness to embrace pain, to face loss, to turn death itself into a teacher, and that truth was more frightening than any weapon. One young alien began to cry quietly, unable to hide the trembling in her body. The teacher tried to continue the lecture but his words stumbled. His eyes flicked constantly toward the human, as if even he felt the weight of that cold truth. After class, the students gathered in small groups, their voices low and fearful. Some insisted the human was lying. No species would sacrifice so many of their own. Others shook their heads, pointing to the scars, the cold eyes, the calm acceptance of suffering. One said, "If it is true then we are children compared to them. We fear pain. They master it." Another whispered, "They do not just survive, they rise from every wound stronger. What chance do we have against such creatures?" The fear grew. spreading like poison, not just through the students but through the academy itself, until even the instructors spoke of it in secret. That night the human walked alone through the academy's quiet corridors, his footsteps steady, every shadow seeming to move away from him. A pair of alien students saw him and froze in place, not daring to move until he passed. When he disappeared into the darkness, one of them whispered, "He carries ghosts with him. I could see them in his eyes." The other whispered back, "No, he carries the weight of his species, the reason they are still alive." The words chilled them both, because they realized humanity's medicine was not built in comfort or peace. It was carved from suffering, sharpened by sacrifice, and carried forward by those who refused to die. The next morning the academy was changed forever. Students no longer saw the human as one of them. They saw him as something else entirely, something that had walked through endless death and still kept walking. Every time their eyes met his scars they were reminded of the forbidden truth. Humanity's strength came from blood. And if that strength was ever turned outward, no empire, no council, no academy would stand against it. The academy had become a place of whispers, the story of the humans. Scars spread beyond the lecture halls, carried on trembling voices and nervous glances. Even those who had never stepped inside the medical wing now spoke as though they had seen it themselves. The fear traveled faster than truth, shaping itself into legends. Some said the human could drink fire and live. Others swore he had survived drowning in acid. Every retelling made him greater, darker, more impossible, and no one dared to laugh it off. Because at the heart of every rumor was a truth they could not deny. He had taken the serpent's venom and lived. He had torn open his own skin and healed with nothing but pain. He had admitted that thousands had died so humanity could survive. And still he walked among them like it was nothing. The alien students began to avoid him in the halls, their voices dropping to silence whenever he entered a room. Once he sat at a cafeteria table and the group already eating there quietly gathered their trays and left without a word. Another time 2 students turned a corner and found him walking toward them. They froze like prey before a predator, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. Then they stepped aside quickly, pressing themselves against the wall until he passed. He did not speak. He did not even look at them. But his calm presence was enough to hollow out their courage. By the time he disappeared down the corridor their hearts were pounding so hard they could not breathe. Rumors reached beyond the academy walls. Alien parents sent messages to their children. Stay away from the human, keep your distance, do not provoke him. Some even demanded their children return home, declaring the academy unsafe. Administrators tried to calm the panic but their own eyes betrayed them. They too had heard the whispers. They too felt the weight of fear. One official muttered in a council meeting, "This is what happens when you allow a deathwelder into our halls." Another argued, "No, this is what happens when you see them for what they really are." And the room fell silent, because no one wanted to admit the truth. In the dormitories the whispers grew darker. Students gathered in secret, trading theories. One said, "Perhaps their planet makes them monsters." Another replied, "No, perhaps they make themselves monsters." Another leaned forward and whispered, "Do you not see? They are not afraid of death. Death is afraid of them." The words sent a chill through the room, because deep down every student felt it was true. The human's calm eyes, his steady steps, his scars. They were not the marks of survival. They were the marks of defiance, as if death itself had tried again and again and failed to claim him. The human walked alone more often now, his footsteps echoing through empty corridors. Sometimes students followed at a distance, watching him from shadows, studying the way he moved. They noticed he never hurried, never looked over his shoulder. He did not act like prey. He acted like something that had never been hunted. One student whispered to another as they watched him disappear into the night, "He walks like nothing can touch him." The other whispered back, "Maybe nothing can." The thought left them trembling. Teachers noticed the change as well. Discussions in class were no longer about theories or treatments. Every topic circled back to the same question. How do humans survive what others cannot? One teacher tried to explain calmly, "Their biology is different, their immune system stronger, their cells more aggressive." But even as he spoke he knew it was not enough. No science could fully explain the sight of a man smiling with poison in his veins. No explanation could erase the image of scars carved into his body that should have killed him many times over. The fear reached its peak when a fight broke out between 2 alien students in the courtyard. A small crowd gathered, watching as the two shouted and shoved each other. Suddenly the human stepped into view, not to intervene, not to threaten, simply passing by. Yet the fight stopped instantly. Both combatants froze, their anger drained into silence. They stepped apart, their heads bowed, and the crowd dispersed as though chased by a storm. The human kept walking without a word, but the silence he left behind was louder than any shout. One witness whispered, "He does not even need to fight. His presence is enough." In the council chambers far above the academy, the leaders argued in private. Some demanded the human be removed. Others demanded more humans be invited. One voice, trembling with fear, said, "If one of them can spread this much terror by simply living among us, imagine what would happen if a fleet of them arrived." Another whispered back, "Imagine what would happen if they considered us enemies." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. No one wanted to say it aloud, but every heart carried the same thought. The galaxy might not survive such a storm. The alien students, once eager to learn from every new lesson, now lived with restless hearts. The human was no longer just a student. He was a shadow cast over all of them, a reminder that their species had limits and his did not. At night some students whispered prayers for protection. Others wrote in journals, trying to put words to a fear too large to name. One alien girl, her hands shaking, wrote only one line, "He should be dead. But he is not. And that is why I cannot sleep." And so the fear spread beyond class, beyond walls, beyond reason, becoming something greater than rumor, greater than truth. It became belief. The belief that humans were not just survivors. They were something more, something that could not be stopped, something that terrified even death itself. And every time the human walked through the academy halls, silent and steady, the belief grew stronger, until it was no longer a question of if they should fear him, but how much the academy could know. Longer contain the whispers. They had spread far beyond the classrooms and courtyards, beyond the dormitories and quiet study halls. They had reached the ears of leaders, administrators, and most dangerously, the Alien Council. The governing body that prided itself on order and stability, now found its sessions filled with tension and unease. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered in the grand chamber, their robes glimmering under the lights, but their voices carried no calm, only fear. The subject of the debate was clear before anyone spoke: the human. One counselor stood, his scaled skin glittering faintly as he raised his voice. "This creature should not remain among our students. It is a danger to them, to us, to everything we know." His words rippled through the chamber, but another counselor, tall and robed in white, stood quickly to counter. "No, it is not danger we see. It is potential. Can you not imagine what it means to have such resilience on our side? A species that survives the impossible could turn the tide of any war." A low rumble filled the hall, voices clashing, some calling for the human's removal, others whispering that they should study him more, harness his strength, learn his secrets. At the far end of the chamber an elder counselor, his skin marked with age, leaned forward and spoke slowly. "I have lived through wars, through famine, through disease, but never have I seen fear spread so quickly. One human, only one, and yet entire academies tremble. Students refuse to sleep. Parents demand their children return. What will happen if more of them come? Will our empires fall without a battle?" The chamber grew silent at his words, because everyone knew it was true. Fear was spreading faster than fire, and it was not carried by weapons, but by whispers. Another voice rose, sharp and commanding. "Perhaps it is better we end this now. Remove him. Send him back before the fear becomes permanent." Yet a soft voice countered from across the hall. "And what will happen when humanity asks why? What will happen if they see our fear? Will they see weakness? Will they test it?" The question cut deep, because all of them had thought it in silence. Humanity did not need to be provoked. Humanity only needed to know they were feared, and fear itself could spark war. As the debate raged, reports were brought in from the academy, documents filled with observations. One report described the serpent venom, another the scar demonstration, another recorded the human's words, "Thousands died." The counselors read the lines in silence, their eyes narrowing, their throats dry. These were not stories or rumors. These were official accounts, evidence of impossible survival, evidence of sacrifice beyond reason. One counselor slammed the datapad down. "This is not science, this is madness." But even his voice shook as he said it, because deep down he knew madness had its own kind of power. The debate dragged into hours, the chamber filled with heated words, yet beneath the noise was the same growing realization. Whether they removed the human or studied him further, the truth remained. Humanity was not like them, and pretending otherwise would not change it. Finally the elder counselor spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Fear them or ally with them. It does not matter. Either path will change us forever. Silence followed, because everyone understood. The galaxy they knew was already gone. The moment the human had smiled with poison in his veins, history had shifted. Meanwhile, at the academy itself, the human walked through the halls as if nothing had changed. But the administrators kept watch, guards stationed quietly at corners, their eyes never leaving him. They feared not only for their students but for themselves. For they knew the council's decision could come at any time. Expulsion, alliance, imprisonment, no one knew, yet the human remained calm, unshaken, almost as if he had seen this before, as if his species had always inspired fear wherever it walked. That night, inside the council chamber, the debate slowed, exhaustion setting in. But the tension did not fade. One counselor whispered the thought that none had dared to say aloud. If this is what one human does to us without trying, what will happen when their fleets arrive? The chamber fell into silence again. The thought lingered like poison, spreading into every mind, and no one had an answer, because the truth was clear. Humanity had not shown its full strength. They had only shown survival, and survival alone was enough to shake the galaxy to its core. The session ended without resolution. No vote, no decision, only unease. The counselors filed out one by one, their heads low, their voices hushed. They returned to their worlds carrying the same fear the students carried, fear that would grow with every retelling, with every whisper, outside the chamber. In the great halls of the capital, citizens asked what had been decided, but no answers came, only silence, silence heavy with dread, silence that told them more than words ever could. Back at the academy the students sensed the shift. They could feel the council's debate pressing down on them like a storm. Some grew quiet, avoiding the human altogether. Others stared at him with open terror. A few even bowed their heads when he passed, as if acknowledging something greater than themselves. The human did not smile, did not speak, but the shadow of the council's fear followed him, and every step he took reminded them all of one thing. He should be dead, and yet he was not, and because of that, the future of the galaxy was already uncertain. The council had not made its decision, but the academy officials knew they could not keep stalling forever. The fear inside the student body was reaching its breaking point. Every day more messages came from worried families. Every day more rumors twisted the truth into something darker. Finally the head of the academy announced a public demonstration. It would be open not only to the students but to visiting officials and military observers. The idea was to show control, to prove that what they had witnessed was not chaos but science. But in truth it was an attempt to calm the storm, to take the whispers and wrap them in order. Yet even the teachers knew they were playing with fire. The great hall of the academy had never been so crowded, rows upon rows of seats filled with alien dignitaries, scientists, military commanders, and wide-eyed students. The stage at the front gleamed under harsh lights, medical equipment lined up neatly, jars of alien medicines displayed alongside the dull human powders and bandages. The human stood at the center once again, calm and silent, his posture steady as if the weight of 100 eyes meant nothing. The air was thick with tension. Every cough, every shift of fabric, every whispered word echoed louder than it should have. The teacher stepped forward, his voice formal but thin. Today we show the resilience of species, the different ways life has found to endure. The first demonstration was ordinary. An alien volunteer received a minor wound treated with healing gel. The wound closed almost instantly. The crowd nodded politely. They had seen this before, they expected it. Then came the human's turn. He prepared his strange powders, his rough cloths, his crude methods. Some officials muttered that it looked barbaric, others leaned forward with fascination. But then the teacher produced a vial, a container sealed long ago, its contents dark and heavy. He spoke in a voice that carried across the hall. This is recorded as a deadly toxin. No species survives contact. It has been studied only in theory. Today, the human has agreed to demonstrate. A gasp spread through the hall. The students froze. Officials leaned forward sharply. The human took the vial without hesitation, uncorked it, and sniffed. His nose wrinkled, his eyes narrowed. Then without a word he drank. The liquid slid down his throat. The silence was absolute. Everyone expected him to fall, to convulse, to scream. The seconds dragged, the crowd holding its breath. His hands tightened, his skin paled, sweat broke across his brow. His legs shook. For a moment it looked like death had finally come. But then he straightened, his breathing ragged but steady. His eyes half closed but unbroken. Alive, still alive. The hall erupted in gasps. Some officials rose to their feet. Others shouted in disbelief. One student covered his face and whispered, "Impossible, impossible." Another trembled so violently he dropped his datapad to the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. The teacher himself stumbled back, unable to hide his shock. Yet the human only wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His voice hoarse but calm. "You see, it hurts. But it does not kill." The words spread like fire through the hall. "They hurt but they do not kill." That simple line shattered what little calm remained. The crowd broke into chaos, dignitaries arguing, commanders whispering urgent orders to aides, students crying or rushing for the exits. One high-ranking alien, his robe heavy with gold trim, whispered loud enough for many to hear, "They don't fear death, because it cannot hold them." The phrase repeated again and again, like a curse, like a prophecy, until it seemed. The whole hall was murmuring it in trembling voices. The human stood silently through the chaos, his body trembling slightly from the toxin but his face calm. His eyes scanning the hall as if memorizing every frightened gaze. For the students it was too much. One collapsed into his seat sobbing. Another clawed at his own arms as if trying to wake from a nightmare. The fear was no longer whispers, no longer rumors. It was real, it was alive. It filled every corner of the hall until it felt like the walls themselves were shaking with it. The demonstration ended in disarray, the officials rushing out in heated arguments, the students fleeing in silence. Only the human remained calm, walking off the stage slowly, his steps heavy but steady, his figure casting a shadow that seemed larger than he was. Those who saw him pass shivered, not from what he had done, but from what it meant. If poison and toxins could not claim them, if even death itself struggled to hold them, then what force in the galaxy ever could? That night, across the academy and beyond, the story spread faster than any fire. The words repeated in every dormitory, every home, every council chamber. They don't fear death because it cannot hold them. Some refused to believe. Others swore they had seen it with their own eyes. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble. Because the truth was clear. The human had not only survived again, he had turned survival into a weapon. And the shadow of that weapon now hung over them all. The academy never returned to normal after the demonstration. The halls were quieter than ever. But it was not peace that silenced them. It was fear. Students avoided each other's eyes. Their voices stayed low. Even the sound of footsteps seemed heavy with unease. The human's presence had become more than rumor, more than whispers. He was now the shadow that followed every conversation, every dream, every heartbeat inside those walls. When he walked past, doors shut quietly, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and even teachers stiffened like statues. No one dared confront him. No one dared ask more questions. The demonstration had answered enough, too much. The officials who had witnessed the event carried their fear back to their governments. Reports arrived daily to the council chambers, all saying the same thing. The human had swallowed a toxin that no species survived, and he had lived, scarred, weakened, but alive. The phrase echoed through every report. He should be dead. Yet he is not. One commander scribbled angrily in the margins of his report. If a single soldier can endure what kills whole battalions, then humanity is not an ally. It is a storm. Another wrote simply, if this is what they can do alone, imagine what they can do together. The council met again in secret sessions. But their debates grew weaker, their voices drowned by the same truth. Humanity could not be contained by rules or treaties. They were something beyond. At the academy, the students could not escape the image of the human's calm face, the sweat on his brow, the way he had stood unbroken even as his body trembled. One alien girl wrote in her journal, "We saw death reach for him and fail. I do not know what that makes him. But it does not make him one of us." Another wrote to his family, "I no longer believe in safety. For if humans walk among us, then safety is a lie." The parents responded quickly, demanding their children return home. Some left the academy entirely, unable to stay where the shadow of humanity lingered. The dormitories emptied. The classrooms grew thin. The whispers became prayers for distance. The human himself remained silent. He attended the classes, walked the halls, ate his meals. But his silence was not peace. It was weight. Every step reminded the students of what they had seen. Every scar that peeked from his sleeve reminded them of what he had endured. The teachers avoided calling on him in lessons. The students avoided sitting near him. Yet their eyes never stopped watching, waiting, fearing. One night a group of students gathered in the courtyard, staring up at the stars. One whispered, "What happens if they choose war?" Another answered in a trembling voice, "Then war will end, not for them, but for us." The silence that followed was heavier than words. The council finally sent observers back to the academy, not to study, but to watch, to measure the fear, to decide what must be done. One observer reported, "I looked into his eyes and I felt as though I was staring into the void, not emptiness, but endurance, as if even the void could not swallow him." Another reported, "He does not need weapons. He is a weapon." Every word, every report only deepened the dread. Yet still the council could not act, because fear itself held them still. If they expelled him, would humanity take offense? If they tried to control him, would humanity push back? If they did nothing, would fear consume them anyway? No path was safe. Days passed, and then weeks, but the memory of the demonstration never faded. The alien students who had once laughed in the halls now walked like shadows themselves, carrying the weight of what they had seen. One young alien who had been in the front row during the toxin test whispered to his friend late at night, "I saw his face when he drank, I saw the pain, and yet he stood. If he can endure that, then nothing can stop them." His friend whispered back, "Maybe even death itself has no power." Over them, both lay awake until dawn, their minds spinning with images of a galaxy ruled not by fleets or weapons but by the simple, terrifying truth of survival. On the final day of term, the human left the academy hall for the last time. He carried no luggage, no weapons, only himself. Yet as he walked the corridors the students parted before him as though he was an army. Their eyes wide, their hearts pounding, no one spoke, no one dared, they only watched, and in their silence was the sound of fear. When he reached the doors he paused, looking back one last time, his eyes scanning the rows of trembling faces. He did not smile, he did not speak, he only turned and walked out into the light, his shadow stretching long behind him. When he was gone, the silence remained, heavier than before. One alien girl picked up her datapad and wrote the final line of her journal. "Today I understood the truth. Humans are not here to learn. They are here to remind us that survival itself can be the sharpest blade." Another student muttered aloud, "If humanity ever chooses war, it will not be soldiers we face, it will be survivors." The words passed quietly from mouth to mouth, a chilling truth carried like a secret through the academy, through the council chambers, through the galaxy itself. And so the story ended where it began, with a whisper that grew into fear, a whisper that became legend. He should be dead, but he is not, and in that simple truth lay the most terrifying secret of all, that humanity had learned to turn death into nothing more than another obstacle, and the galaxy would never forget it.